Take the total number of hours or miles a bomber can fly. Divide by 2, and you have its range. The maximum distance it can reach, deliver its cargo, and return to its base. Extend this distance beyond 1/2, plus gliding ratio times altitude, minus landing approach, and you have disaster. You have exceeded PNR, the point of no return. In mid-1944, our longest range bomber, the B-29, is a yo-yo tied to the string of distance. From Seattle, it can reach impotence and return. From San Francisco, frustration. From Los Angeles, Catalina. Beneath its deadliness lies only the Pacific. From Alaska, the vastness of nowhere is within range. From Hawaii, the friendly island. From Tarawa and the Gilberts, the fringe of the ultimate. But we are still too far away.
Capture of any island which supported or could support airfields from which our planes could function was always an item of strategic importance. But 2 airfield locations captured by the Marines accomplished particularly important objectives in the overall Pacific strategy, enabled us to accelerate our favorable progress and materially shorten the war. Although the Palau campaign was launched several months after those in the Marianas, we will deal first with the field on Peleliu.
And from that field were going to be over our fleet. We wanted them to be ours.
It is September 15th, 1944. We storm ashore through heavy enemy fire. This porcupine of jagged coral rises 30 feet above the beach level. From its inaccessible beach face, rifles, machine gun, and a 47 millimeter come to life. We probe for its weakness. Apparently, it has none. Assault from the beach is impossible. The rifle platoon assigned to deal with it fights inland, then executes a turning movement to take it from the landward side. Underbrush protecting their rifle pits is burned away. Resistance is fierce and stubborn. The support platoon is committed. In a 2-hour firefight, they annihilate the 4 pillboxes mounting heavy enemy machine guns. The 5th, the principal installation, is a powerful reinforced casemate built into the coral near the base of the cliff. It withstands repeated assaults. Here is emplaced the 47 millimeter gun, which has been creating havoc on the landing beach. We close one opening, they pop up at another. But every such installation must have an air vent. Alone, exposed. A lieutenant, the surviving platoon leader, dodges forward. Missed by a score of riflemen, he drops a smoke grenade to cover the approach. A corporal launches a rifle grenade into the firing aperture. It strikes the gun barrel, knocking the weapon out of action and igniting something inflammable.
No one pushed this man into this deed of bravery. He was driven to it by that intangible something inside that so frequently explodes the ordinary into the realm of greatness. He could not settle for less. He was fighting for so much more. He was a Marine.
As we push forward in the center, the terrain is favorable for maneuver. We move toward our 01 phase line. Here we tie in, partly because of the action similar to that at the Coral Hill, which is retarding the drive on the left, and partly because of the heavy artillery fire, which sweeps the airfield from the high ground to the north. Shortly after noon, pillboxes slow our advance. Tanks have been coming ashore since 20 minutes after the initial landings. We call for assistance. Pending the arrival of the tanks, Amtraks lend supporting fire and are hit. The area is cleared and we move forward. Other units move north across the exposed runways. As we progress, the enemy artillery fire is intensified. Then we get a break. Tanks moving up in support of I Company, 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines, are obliged to skirt the southern edge of the airfield to avoid an anti-tank ditch. Our unit is I Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. When their driver asks if we are I Company, we say yes. Together, we move forward. Later, the mistake is rectified. At 4:50 p.m., the enemy makes a tank infantry sortie across the northern portions of the airfield. Concerted efforts wipe out both tanks and infantry. Repeated smaller attacks are beaten off. By nightfall, we own 1/2 of the airfield. Dawn brings increased artillery fire from the enemy. Deadly fire pours from the flank installations in the woods and scrubs jungle. As we reach the main service apron and hangar area, we encounter Japanese resistance in strength. By the night of September 16, 1944, the airfield is in our possession.
By the 28th of September, the enemy on Peleliu had been compressed into that last pocket of bitter resistance. But artillery fire from nearby Ngesebus was taking a toll of the Marines. To clear this island and also secure the fighter strip which it supported, a shore-to-shore operation was planned.
Yards across the strait lies the enemy-held island. Tanks, Amtracs armored, and LVTs are assigned the mission. To protect our concentration point, Marine planes begin the strafing, which will not lift until we are 90 feet from the enemy beach. Tanks lead the landing force, flanked by the LVTAs, followed by the LVTs, filled with the assault troops. Three of the tanks swamp. LVTAs spearhead the landing and furnish covering fire. Pillboxes and caves impeding our progress are disposed. clearing the airstrip. In an area presumed cleared, artillery begins construction of a position. One Marine is wounded, lies exposed to enemy fire. A tank covers while his buddies rescue him. Some of us administer first aid. Others go after the sniper. Clutching a grenade, he darts from his concealment.
Capture of the airfield on Peleliu and the fighter strip on Ngesebus secured and anchored the right flank of what would be the drive into the Philippines. Now we knew that any aircraft flying from either of these fields would provide friendly air cover, if needed, for the invasion at Leyte. The other field, which had such a far-reaching historical and strategic effect, was located on Tinian in the Marianas.
And what was its special significance, General Smith?
Its location.
It would place Tokyo directly beneath our bomb sites. This would enable us to bring a taste of war to the Japanese home islands, destruction to her war production facilities, and weaken her internal morale. It would breach the inner defense circle. It was the beginning of the end.
It is July 25th, 1944. The island is Tinian. The day is D+2. The objective, airfields number 1 and 3. As our unit presses farther to the north, resistance develops along the coast. Enemy survivors of last night's savage counterattack are holed up in the craggy coral. In about 3 seconds, one of the enemy will dart along the crest and try to kill our cameraman.
The most urgent need before final planning of the operation began was for up-to-date air photographs of the islands. These indicated that the enemy was thoroughly entrenched in the Gilberts. One atoll, Tarawa, had been turned literally into a fortress. The enemy had transported heavy guns to the atoll and had carefully constructed defense positions. Navy photo reconnaissance officers realized at once that this would be no routine operation. Tarawa looked like a ring of steel. The next step in preparing for the invasion was to soften up the targets in the Gilberts, as well as neighboring islands with airstrips in the Marshalls. In October and November 1943, U.S. planes operating in the Central Pacific flew a series of raids on Japanese positions in the Gilberts and Marshalls. Crews were well prepared for opposition. It was apparent to all that the Japanese would fight stubbornly for their Central Pacific bases. The U.S. airmen were not disappointed. The principal targets in the Marshalls were the airfields, from which the Japanese planes operated, bases which were indispensable to the enemy's defense of the Central Pacific area. the enemy's Marshall Island bases were visited regularly by American bombers. From November 14th to November 21st, American Air Force bombers flew 13 missions to the Gilberts and Marshall. At the same moment, halfway around the globe, 2 American task forces from Hawaii and New Zealand were converging on the Gilbert Islands, a key position in the Japanese ring of outer defenses. The trip to the target was made in radio silence to lessen the chances of an attack by enemy planes or subs. In the 2 amphibious task forces, some of the units had to be refueled en route. That operation was often a delicate one. When a fighting ship needed fuel, the job had to be done, and promptly, regardless of what the weather was like. In the Southern Attack Force, en route from New Zealand, the Marines were briefed on every detail of Beisho Island of Tarawa Atoll, where one of the Gilbert's invasions was to be made. These briefings were repeated so that every man would be well familiar with the island's topography and landmarks. The men put their spare time to good use. They were well aware that a weapon in top working order would often save their lives. As the ships neared the objective, the crews expected an enemy air attack. But the convoys were not disturbed by any organized enemy raid. Just before D-Day, the men dedicated their efforts. Soon after dawn on November 21st, 1943, the assault on the atolls began. At Macon, the bombardment by ships and carrier-based planes continued for almost 5 hours. One reinforced regimental combat team, the 165th of the Army's 27th Division, was to make the attack against Macon. This was the first taste of combat for the men in the assault waves. After the aerial bombing and strafing of the target and the supporting naval bombardment, the actual seizing of the objective was finally, as always, the job of the men with the rifles. The Army troops invading Macon had a 6 or 7 to 1 superiority in numbers and firepower. The soldiers landed against relatively light resistance. It became apparent that the enemy had not planned a strong defense of Macon against a sizable invasion force. Ashore on Butaratari Island of Macon Atoll, the soldiers encountered some opposition, but successfully overwhelmed the small enemy garrison. The island was taken by the men of the 165th Army Regimental Combat Team after 3 days of sporadic fighting. Many military men felt that the job should have been achieved in a shorter time, considering the light Japanese defenses. In any case, the enemy had been thoroughly wiped out at Macon. 100 miles to the south of Macon, Beisho Island of Tarawa Atoll was the target for the Southern Attack Force. Early on D-Day morning, the Navy went into action once more in an attempt to soften up the objective for the landing. The plan called for carrier planes to coordinate their attacks with the warship's bombardment and with the invasion pattern itself. But the schedule soon became upset, and the confusion on the timing of various elements of the attack had a calamitous effect on the operation. The Navy shelled the target island of Beisho on D-Day morning for only 3 hours before the landing. The bombardment was heavy while it lasted, yet no one knew for certain, of course, what damage was being done to the enemy's defenses. Someone said confidently that not a Jap would be left alive on the island to contest the Marines' assault. Before dawn, the invasion vehicles started for the line of departure. The naval bombardment continued at intervals almost to each hour. The first waves of Marines, luckily, were in amphibian tractors. Succeeding waves were in landing boats. At the fringing reef, fate and the tides were against the Marines and the boats. The tide was lower than expected, and the boats were not able to clear the reef. Thus, a great percentage of the assault force was stuck 500 yards from the beach. Fortunately, the amphibian tractors, which carried the first assault waves, climbed right over the reef and continued into the beach. But on that eventful D-Day at Tarawa, the landing force had only about 100 amp tracks. These invaluable tracked vehicles made many trips from the reef to the shore before being knocked out by enemy fire. As each hour neared, carrier planes strafed enemy positions. The assault Marines continued toward shore, while the carrier pilots had one last crack at the enemy. At 9:10, the Marines of the 2nd Division landed on the enemy's fortress. The fight for a foothold on the tiny beach of Tarawa was tougher than anything the Marines had ever faced. Casualties were very heavy. This was the first Pacific invasion which was vigorously opposed on the beach. During those first bitter hours, it grew readily apparent that the fight for Tarawa was to be a battle of epic proportions.
There was some mopping up to do, as always after a battle. There were still caves to blow up or close up. Still some die-hard Japanese snipers to be routed out of their holes. On Tarawa, we encountered the fanaticism that we had come to expect of the enemy. The battle on this sandy square mile was the toughest single fight in the 167-year history of the Marine Corps. Whatever lay ahead, the lessons learned at Tarawa would prove invaluable in future operations against other islands closer to Japan. Of the men who died here in glory, none died in vain, and all Americans can forever be proud of the name of Tarawa.